So I did bezel one of these off camera just to see what they sort of looked like, and I think that will be nice. I was debating whether it needs to go like that, but I think it definitely needs to be on the diamond shape to marry in with the diamond shape of this motif. So I'm going to stitch this one down here, and I'm just making sure that the center of this bezel here is matching up with the center of that bottom of that filigree piece there. If I don't have that matching, it's going to be quite obvious, and we're going to start to get off center with everything if we're not careful. So I'm just using the thread that I used for the bezel, and I'm bringing my thread up and down through that foundation, through a bead in that bezel, and then back down the foundation, and just sort of zigzagging between the two just to secure that in position. I'm really clamping that with my thumb to make sure that it's straight and it's exactly where I want it to be. Be very easy to get this positioned slightly wonky. And I'm just being careful when I go through the beads that I don't pull too hard or, you know, crack any beads. That one's tricky to get through, so just loosen my grip on that to allow the needle to go through nicely. And then I'll bring my concrete thumb grip back to hold that while I stitch it in place. And you can see even between each of the stitches, I'm just sort of looking to make sure that what I've done is holding that square and in place. And I can sort of bend the foundation a bit to let my needle get into position. And I'm really only going through delicate beads, so I haven't gone through any 15s in that bezel. Go through here. And probably going through 2 or 3 of those delicas on each side there to anchor that in. But again, just being careful that I'm gentle with my needle going through the beads. And you'll notice I'm using thread. I used thread with the bezel, so I've kept the same piece of thread to attach this down onto the foundation. I usually use fireline for all my bead embroidery, but with bezels, thread is good because it gives you a bit of a chance to, it's got a bit of flex to it, so if you're trying to squeeze a stone into a tight bezel, it's got a bit of give to it, which allows the thread to stretch slightly. With fireline, you don't have that stretch and give, and if you needed it to get it to fit the stone into the bezel shape, then you risk cracking your beads, which is not fun. Alright, look at that. I'm super happy with that. I now need to bezel another 1, 2, 3 stones. I'm going to use the same bezel for all of them, and obviously we've got our pinkier one here at the top to match where it's gone from blue to pink in the background, and then we've got the 2 blue ones from the challenge to go on the side, and I'm going to use all the same beads for all of them to carry the design across the whole piece. So I will bezel these other 3 stones and I'll come back and we'll have a look at how it's looking. Okay, so I've bezeled the stones here that needed to be used as part of the challenge. We had the 3 cushion cuts and then the one that I added at the top there, which I think just gives that nice, because this is pink here and this has got the pinks in it but still highlights of the blue. I think it just really carries that nicely in the design. Now, sorry about the reflection. Let's see what happens if I turn these lights off. It's still a little bit reflecty, but you can get a bit of an idea here of how this is looking. I'm super happy with how that looks. Now I want to do something in between here, and I've picked out a few extra components in my studio to have a play with. I've got some cup chain, which I've got some nice sapphire blue, and I've got some fuchsia pink. Now I think these are about a 2.5, 3 mil, about a 3 mil cup chain, but look how pretty that looks if I lay that in there. So I think it'd be nice to do perhaps a perimeter of the pink around. I think that would, so I would stop it obviously either side of these stones, but we'll just lay it there for now just to get an idea of that. I think that would be nice. And then I did get out some of these are a 2-hole cabochon bead, so they're flat on the back and they've got 2 little holes in the side of them. Probably tricky to sort of see the holes there. Can you see them there? 2 holes. So they're great to be able to sew them down. I did wonder whether they'd be nice in these corners, but then I'm not sure whether I'm overdoing it or whether it still looks nice. What we might need to do is do that perimeter of the cup chain and then come back and see how these cabochons look. But I think it still helps it have that nice, it's got an, even though it's not nautical colours, for me it's got an underlying sort of nautical compass theme, I think, because it's got that very specific north, south, east, west look to it. So I think that could be quite nice with those. And then I still wanted to be able to use bugle beads. I've got these ones that we talked about earlier. And when you're designing, you can just lay the beads as if you've sewn them down and just take a look at how it's looking. I thought these might look good in here. The only problem is these bugles are a little bit, maybe about the same length. I was going to say they're a little bit bigger than the cabochons, but they might be about the same length. So it could be nice to have a few of those in between. That's looking really good. And then this pewter that's in the center, I sort of want to carry a little bit of that color throughout the design in a couple of spots, and maybe I can just dot one of the seed beads in some of these little gaps here just to bring in that pewter color. These are the Miyuki Duracoat pewter seed beads, and I think that will help just highlight that motif but throughout the rest of the design, because I want it to be cohesive and all marry together as a final piece. And I think this idea is looking pretty good. I really like that. So first steps, let's attach some of this cup chain. Another good thing is to, obviously I've got this all on film so I can go back and look at the film, but if you lay your design out like this, take a photo of it, or walk away, have a cup of tea, come back and take a look at it with fresh eyes and see, what is your eye drawn to when you walk away and come back to it? Is it drawn where you want your eye to be drawn to, like into the focal piece? Are you drawn here? Or is there something sitting a bit off and that's pulling your eye in towards, you know, the side of the piece? When you're working on something really symmetrical like this, it's really important to have a look at what you're seeing, and is there enough contrast between the components that you've put next to each other? Like if I put all of these components next to each other, can I see them in their own, or is it sort of morphing into, I can't tell what I'm looking at? So you can see that by putting that pink between the 2 shades of blue there, I can still see what's going on. And that row of pink really frames the center focal, but it's also, it goes with it quite nicely, and it's not looking messy yet. It's very easy with bead embroidery to go too far with a piece and end up losing the shape or the design. I'm also thinking I don't want to come out to the edges of these stones. I think the piece of bead embroidery will finish like going in here, in and then out at the stones, I think that will be a lovely finished shape rather than having just a full circle. I think it will create much more interest having it go to the shape of what we're creating here. So let's get some of this off it for now, and we'll do the cup chain first, and then probably the cabochons, the 2-hole cabochons, and we'll see how it's looking before we do any seed beads to fill gaps and bugle beads. Alright, so I'm thinking, just want to work out how many stones fit nicely in this gap. I'm thinking I need to cut it just there. I use my old scissors this time rather than my new ones. I'm just pushing that in this little gap with no glue just to see how it fits before I... Oh yes, yeah, that's really lovely. Yes, I like that a lot. I think the fuchsia really adds a nice shape around there. And this is, it's getting a little bit washed out on the camera, but this is a really bright fuchsia cup chain. Alright, so if I use that amount of stones, do they fit here in all the gaps? This is what I need to work out. Yes, I think it will. So I'm going to cut 4 pieces, or another 3 pieces to match the length of this one I just cut. I've got my cup chain cut to length. Now I'm going to glue these in position. Get the glue. Just popping it on directly onto the back of these little cup chain stones, then use my tweezers to help me to position it. A bit of glue on my tweezers and get that in position like that. Use the tweezers to guide it. You can press it down with the handle of the tweezers. And then you can use your trusty bead scoop just to scoop away any excess glue there. If you forget to wipe that off your bead scoop when it's wet, you can just pick that off when it's dry. You can just wipe that onto a tissue so that it's clean again. And I'll just wipe the tips of my tweezers where they got a bit gluey as well. Okay, we're going to repeat that for the other sections, and then we'll come back and stitch that down once it's dried. Now I just want to stitch over the top of each of those little, they've got like a little metal bridge between each of the stones. I don't want my thread to get caught on the claws, but just cinch down into between the stones and hold them into position. Just bring my needle up on the outer edge and then passing down on the inner, just because I find that a little bit easier than coming up between the cup chain and the bezel. And just stitching that in position. Okay, looks good. Come over here, carry on with the next one, and do that all the way around, and we'll come back once I've finished stitching this down. Alright, I have attached the cup chain and stitched it all the way around. You can see the stitch marks there, and it's looking rather pretty, I think. That's the top there. So I think what we'll do now is see what these look like, the little 2-hole cabs, and I think they'll look good. They sort of tie in nicely with the colours. They sort of reflect a little bit of pink and blue on the surface of them, and where they reflect you're also getting a little bit of this pewtery sort of colour reflecting as well in the light. So I actually think they're perfect for that position. So I think we'll stitch those in, and then we'll put a pewter seed bead just in the corners there, just to fill that little gap between. I'll just drop one in there. We'll stitch a little seed bead in there like that, in the corner there. So I'll do that for all of these positions, and then we'll come back and look at putting some bugle beads down as well. So when I'm stitching on one of these 2-hole cabochons, I tend to hold it on with my thumb and work out where the holes are. They're just here and here. Bring my needle up right next to the hole, go through that hole in the cab and down the other side. And the way you can stop these moving about is if you make sure that where you're bringing your thread up and passing down is right next to where that hole is in the foundation. You'll find that if you bring it up just slightly next to it, it creates too much movement. You can see that solid already just from going through that first hole once. Now come right up next to that second hole there, that's just there. Pass through that, and you can see I'm just bending the foundation a little bit to allow access to those holes. Bring the needle up, go through the hole, and I've gone through each of those holes twice. And then while I'm here, let's just pop a seed bead into that little spot like that. Yes, I think that's going to be really nice. So I'll stitch on the rest of these and we'll come back and see what it looks like. Alrighty, I have done the little seed beads in the corners and the 2-hole cabochons, and now it's time to have a think about adding some bugles, and we'll see how many fit in here. Just lay a few down to test. Oh, sometimes it can be a bit tricky with the gaps, like that. And looks like 7 is the sweet spot there. Let's put another 7 up in this gap and just see that that's roughly the same as well. This is sometimes where you find that your design's not symmetrical because you can fit more beads in one spot than you can in another. So that's 5, 6, 7. Oh, I'm all a fumbly fingers. Lost one over there. Yep, 7 looks like the right amount, and I'm going to try and keep them so that they're close into the edge and fanning out all the way around. And I think this is going to make a really lovely effect to sort of frame this piece. I hope you can tell I'm really enjoying this design. I get really excited when things are working well with what's in my head as to how it's coming together. Almost looking like a pink and blue style regal navy badge or something. I don't know, it's still got a little bit of nautical feel for me. We've got there 6 and one more makes 7. Yeah, lovely. Look at that. Really happy with that. Now I am going to stitch these down with file line, and I'm going to go through each of these beads a couple of times because bugle beads can be quite sharp on the little ends sometimes, and I don't want them to cut into that thread. I'm also going to try and make sure that the thread is just exactly where it needs to be right down the end of the bead, and that the 2 threads that I'm not putting through that bugle bead, they're not pulling the bead in different directions, because that's when they risk them cutting. I just want them to hold it in position and not have any tension against those sharp edges. Alright, so I'm going to bring my needle up so that I've got my first bugle bead positioned here at this angle, sort of a right angle to up against this cabochon and out from the cup chain. So my needle needs to come up in there, and I'll pick up one of my bugle beads and I'm going to bring it right down on the thread and make sure that the angle that I'm laying it in position is exactly where I want it to be, and stitch that down. So then what I need to do is go through that again, and sometimes getting through the beads you just need to bend the foundation to be able to get into it the second time, because it's tricky to get your needle in there. Like that. And then we're going to come up in the middle next to the cup chain again and pop our next bugle bead on, and each time I'm picking up the bead I'm going to bring it down, lay it in position, and because this side of where they are is wider than this inside, they're going to be touching in the middle, and they're going to be just a little tiny gap there on the outside. So just making sure that I'm accommodating for that, because if I don't sort of fan them out from the center there, I'll end up with them all being smushed together and not looking right. So I just continue to sew the bugle beads on in that way, making sure they're still close together like that. Done the bugle beads, and I think that looks rather nice. And now I need to decide whether I'm doing anything else along this edge before I cut the design out. And I did wonder about doing a little bit of cup chain, which, I mean, that could look really nice just to finish that off. Let's just trim those stones and see what they look like in position without being joined onto that larger piece. Just lay them along there. Yes, I think that's really lovely. So I think what I'll do next is cut out some pieces of cup chain to just frame the design. I like how these points here on the corners extend out from roughly the middle of that. See how we've got, you know, half of the stone is still protruding, and I think that creates a really nice shape. So I'm going to definitely glue some cup chain along here, stitch that down into position, and then we'll be up to, I think, cutting this out. Still heavily on my mind is where are these 6 sapphire bicones going to go. Okay, so I have stitched down all of the cup chain here, and heavily in my mind while I was doing all of that was these 6 bicones that I still need to use. And so what I did is I went through my stash and I've just pulled out some pink, fuchsia pink bicones in the same size, the 6mm, and I also had some sapphire bicones in a 4mm in my stash, so I've pulled those out as well. We've still got these size 8 seed beads that we haven't used, so maybe I can use some of these in a beaded rope, or maybe some of these. Although keeping in mind, I didn't use any on here yet. Do I use them within the edging? Maybe that would help to tie the design together. Or do I stick to the beads that I used here in the bezel and the beads that I used for the little accents in the corners? Maybe that should be what I stick to, these beads and the blue, which have run away off my desk. I could do something like this to hang it from, and maybe drop some of these into. Thinking maybe a herringbone rope or a chenille rope to hang this from. Needs to be something, I think, quite substantial to balance the size of this. I think if I just did a basic stringing off this, it would look unfinished or a bit like an afterthought. So I need to think about what type of rope it's going to be that ties in with it. To use all different size beads, it can quite often be a spiral rope is really easy, but I don't know that a spiral goes with this symmetrical type design so well. So I'm sort of just nutting out in my head in the background while I'm still working on this, where's the rest of this design going to go? The other thing I'm considering is maybe using these pewter beads when I do the backing of this bead embroidery. Maybe I can use these for the edges. It'll help tie in the central component and the little corner ones that we put in, and it will also help tie into possibly the rope as well. So I'm just always thinking about how can I marry in all of the components I've used already, and if I did bring in other colors or other beads, are they going to match what we've done so far and be cohesive part of this design?